Hey everybody. In this next video, we're going to be covering working with the key and door mechanics for our visual scripting platformer. So I will start sharing my screen and we will jump right into it. So I am in level 2 already, as you can see. And as you might notice, my player, my spikes, my flag, I have these all have these little like node icons, and sometimes they're a little bit large and in the way. There's also this camera icon, and we have these other little icons for the HUD loader and other objects that are kind of scripted. If these are getting in your way or they're bothering you, we can turn these off and we can change the size of these. These are called your gizmos. And if you go to the top right of your scene view, we're in this little toggle visibility. You can toggle this on and off if you prefer. You can also drop this down and you can change the size of these icons too, if you prefer to have them a little bit smaller. So that's just a helpful little hint or tip. Now, as far as getting started with the key and door mechanics, what we're going to be doing is adding a script to the key, to the door, and then to the player themselves. We'll also be adjusting and cleaning up the script for the HUD itself so that whenever we're in a level that doesn't have a key, the empty key does not show up. And whenever we're in a level that does have the key, the empty key shows up in the HUD. And we'll also have it whenever the player picks up the key icon will light up in the HUD. So we will go ahead and get started. Let's see here. The first thing we're going to want to do is select our key. We can select our actual key object here, and we're going to add a script to it. So script machine, add component, script machine. We're going to create a new script machine. So I'm going to hit new. I'm going to put it in my macros, and I'm just going to call it key. Here we go. And I'm going to edit graph. This graph is pretty straightforward. What we'll be doing is looking for when the player collides. When that player collides, we'll be setting a variable, and we're going to call this a has key variable. And we can go ahead and set that up now, actually. If I select my player, I will go down to the variables. I can also view the variables for my player, not just in the Blackboard window, but also in the inspector. So if you go to this variables tab, I can drop that down and I can add a variable here. I'm going to call it has key, capital H, capital K, no space, and hit enter. You'll notice that when I hit enter over here and add this variable, it also adds it down here in my Blackboard. So again, you can use either one of these spaces, whatever is more convenient for you. This is going to be a Boolean value, which again means it's just a yes or no or a true false value. Does the player has this key or they do not have this key? So next, I'm going to go back to my key variable. I'll go ahead and maximize this. There we go. I'll right click and I'm going to do on collision with. Remember that tag or that super unit that we made, it's coming in handy again. So my tag is going to be player. And whenever the player runs into this key, I'm going to set a variable that I have already defined. It's going to be an object variable, and it's going to be has key. And I'm also going to be tying this object to the object that I'm interacting with. So next, I'm going to check a Boolean value. And I'm going to do a Boolean literal. And I'm just going to check this box so that whenever the player collides with this key, I'm setting this has key variable from the player as a check value. So that means I do indeed have it. After I do that, I'm then going to destroy the game object. So I'm going to look up game object and destroy. I'm just looking for the object, not a time or anything. There we go. And I'm going to destroy the actual instance of this key. So I'm destroying the key in the game space, but this value is still going to be checked in my variables component. So for the object, I'm just going to choose this, which means the key itself. So the key will be destroyed when it is picked up. Okay, so now I have this value. And if I play through here, I should be able to pick up my key and I should see that it is checked off as had or has key. So if I toggle down my values over here, I'll select my player. There we go. We see that has key is not selected. So let's go and pick up the key. And now that I have it, the key has disappeared, it is deleted, and my value has changed to checked. Now notice I still can't do anything with this door. I need to create a script for this door that detects when the has key variable is checked in my player, and then I need to change the door whenever that happens. So I'm going to select the door. We're going to add a component. It's going to be a script machine. It's going to be a new script machine. I'm going to save it in my macros, and I'm going to call it door instead of key. There we go. And I don't need these on start and on updates. So I'll delete those. I'll maximize my view, and we'll start making the script for the door. So I want to check for my on collision detection first, right? Or on collision with. Remember, this is that on collision that we set up earlier, and it is really paying off. So I'm looking for my player tag. Whenever this collides with something, I'm going to use an if statement. And we're actually just checking our player value. We're going to be looking for I'm going to get variable, if I can spell it right. And this is going to be an object variable, because what I'm looking for is the has key variable from my player game object. So that's the object that I'm pulling from. So I'll select this object node and attach it here. So this is just saying this is the object, the colliding object. It should be tagged player, and I'm pulling a value or a variable value from it called has key. And that is my condition for my if statement. So if the has key value is true, then we want the door to be open. So if it's true, we're going to set a box collider 2D to set enabled. And we're going to uncheck this box. So we're actually unenabling this box collider for the door, which means the player should be able to walk through it. It's no longer presenting or a wall or a barrier for the player. And we also want to use our sprite renderer to set a sprite. And we want to set this as the open door sprite. So I'm just going to type in door here and hit door open. So this will visually indicate that the player can walk through. This will mechanically open up the door. So this is a two-part process. So we're changing the art for this, and then we're changing the mechanic of it. So we're enabling or unenabling or disabling the collider. So I'm just going to mark this off as the kind of has key. And then we're going to go back to our if statement. So if the player collides with the door and the has key variable is false, then we're going to want to just send out a message. We're not going to change the door because we don't want the player to walk through it and it's already set up. But we will do a debug log. And this is a way to kind of debug your games, writing these little log statements. And you can apply these to other things. If you're trying to test something and have it spit out a message saying, hey, this works or this doesn't, this is one way to do it. So I'm going to choose this message. And for this message, I'm going to use a string literal, because remember, that is just a line of characters. So I can write whatever message I want in here. Missing key. Or maybe you're missing the key. There we go. All right. And so I'm just going to section this off as missing key debug note. There we go. Okay. So now let's play through here. My door should work now. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. So if I walk into the door, I'll turn on my console view. And if I walk into the door, I see that I'm missing the key. And I also misspelled missing. So now if I jump and get the key, we'll check my player variables. Has key value is checked. If I walk into the door, we see that the sprite has changed and I can now walk through and I can go over to level 3. Okay. Perfect. Now, the last thing we want to do is to create the HUD element to our key. So if we're in level 2 and the key is in this level, we want the empty key to show up in our HUD next to our health bar. If we collect the key, we want the HUD icon to show the collected key, not just the hollow key. And also, we want, if we're in a level that does not have a key and door mechanic, we don't want to see the empty key in the HUD. So we want to just cancel that out and kind of not show it at all. Now, to do this, we're going to have to go to our HUD scene. So I'm going to hit Control S to save. I'm going to go to Project, and I'm going to open up my HUD scene. So what I can do is click on my HUD. I'll drop this down, go to my row. And if I go to my scene, if I put my cursor in my scene view, I hit F, I'll focus in on that section. Now, what I want to do is toggle this row down and go to my key object. This is what I'll actually be scripting. So what I'll do, let's see here, is add a component. We're going to add a script machine. And then I've pointed this out in the past, but in this case, we're not actually going to be making a new script. I mean, we're going to be making a new script, but we're not going to be saving it anywhere. This is the only place this script will be used on this instance. So I'm just going to use an embedded graph. This saves a little bit of performance. And when you're making really large scale projects, this will make a larger difference. For this project, it's not, but it is an alternative method to creating scripts where you don't have to save them as assets in your project. So I'm just going to call this, we'll call this HUD key graph. And I'm going to hit edit graph. So I'm going to open this up. And we'll start with our onStart function. We're going to use actually both of these, so I'm not going to delete them just yet. So the first thing we want to do is look for if we have a key in this scene. If not, we want to hide the key. So on start, I'm going to do a null check. And so what this is essentially doing is checking for an object. And for our parameter or our input or the object that we're looking for, we're going to be looking for a game object with a tag of key. There we go. And this is important. Again, I've mentioned this before, but you want to make sure you're spelling this all the same way it's spelled everywhere else, especially when you're looking for tags, when you're looking for layers or other things like that. Okay, so we want a null. We want to set this as null. Game object, set active. Go. And if this is null, if we do not have a game object tagged key in our level or in our scene, if we check and there is none of that, then we're going to set null as this game object, which in this case is our key. So essentially, this is just for Node saying, hey, we're going to check, do we have a game object with a tag of key? If we don't, if it's a null check, if it is null, if it's not there, if it doesn't exist in this level at all, we're just going to set this object to unactive or inactive. Okay, so I'm just going to group this up and we'll call this hide key if not in level. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do, and this is a little bit trickier, not that much. We're going to want to update the visual element of our key component. So is it full or is it empty? Do we have the key or do we not have the key? So we want to update this according to whether the player has the key or not. So what we're going to be doing is checking the player's has key value, seeing if it's true or false, and then depending on the value of that Boolean, or the has key Boolean, we are going to set a sprite or the visual element, the art aspect of this, as an open key or an empty key or a has key kind of icon. So first thing we're going to do on update, and on update, remember this calls every instance or every frame in a scene, whereas on start up here only calls at the very beginning of a scene. So on update, we're going to go to image, set sprite. For our sprite icon, we're going to do a select because we have two different options that we want to choose from. All right, our condition for this true or false, so how we set this, our condition is going to be a variable object, or object variable called has key. And remember, we're pulling this variable from our player. So I'm going to do game object find with tag, and we'll type in player. There we go. And then for the true statement, we're going to look for a sprite literal. And we're going to call this, we'll just type in key and we'll do the full key. So if this value is true, if the has key value is true, we want to set our sprite to our full key. If the has key value is false, so if the player does not have the key, we want to set the key to empty. So all I'm gonna do is copy and paste this sprite. So I'm gonna Control C, Control V, link this to false, and I'm gonna change this to key empty. There we go, HUD key empty. Now let's test this. I'm gonna hit Control S, go to my project and go to level 1, and I'll hit play. Now we don't have the key in here, so I should not see the empty key HUD item in my scene. It is not there. Perfect. So let's go to level 2 and see if it shows up. There we go. So I have my empty key here, and now let's grab it, and it is showing up. Perfect. Does it still work? All right. Wonderful. Now, there is one small thing that I want to make a point to mention, and I'm going to go back to my HUD scene to show this. So I click on my key item here. There we go. Go to my script graph. Now, I can section this off too. We'll do this for date. Right. Okay. One thing I want to show is that this game object find with tag tends to be a little bit of a slower process. Now, for this game, this is a small project. This will not be a major impact, and this is not necessarily anything to be concerned with, but this can really lead to slower performance in larger projects, especially when you have something on update. When you're looking for an object with a tag on an update event that's firing every single instance of a frame. So if your game's playing at 60 frames per second, this is happening. You are hitting this find object with tag 60 times every second, and that can bog down memory, especially if you have several of these find with tags going on at multiple times during multiple occurrences. So one way we can kind of streamline performance and tighten this up is to instead use a variable or an application variable. Now, I'll show you guys how to do this. So I'm going to right click and get variable. We've done this several times. We haven't used an application yet. And I'm going to call this player. Now, this is something called a singleton, and this is not actually the instance of it. If I do this and plug it in right here, this will not work as is because I do not have my player set. I'm getting a variable, but I have not set my variable. To set this, what I have to do is I'm going to save. I'm going to go to my level 1, select my player, and open up this graph. Now in here, I have to set my variable or set my application variable. So what I'm going to do is look for the start. I'm going to set variable, and it's going to be an application variable. I'm going to call it player. And this application will be, the actual object of this will be this. In this case, since this is attached to the player object, player game object, it will make the player game object the player application variable. This just makes things a lot easier because you're setting this once, and then we can call that single variable every time. So we're just pinging it instead of doing a wide search through your whole scene every instance. So what I'm going to do is just kind of like section this off and just call it my singleton. And now this should work. So, and again, this is a small thing. This is really, it won't be incredibly important for this individual project, like this sample project, but in moving forward, understanding how that works and really trying to optimize your code and your logic makes a big difference, especially with larger projects. So just keep that in mind. So let's play from level 1 and just make sure this is all working. Okay, so no key in my HUD on level 1. All right, an empty key. All right, I'm still missing the key when I bump into the door. We see that that message plays every time I interact with that collider. If I grab the key shows up in the HUD. I can walk through the door, and there we go. All right, so that is the basics of the key and door mechanic, and that's what I'll be looking for. Good luck, and let me know if you guys have problems.